can you touch on, I think for most of our listeners, the orthodoxy is a bit foreign to them, and theosis is primarily an Orthodox perspective. It's not only, but it generally has its heart there. Can you explain what theosis means a little more, and maybe how it relates to, whether, I don't want to use the term original sin, but how does theosis, sin, and divinity all kind of work together in that way? What does that mean?
Right. So original sin is a doctrine in many Western branches of Christianity. It's based on a lot of Augustine's teaching in the Anglican Communion, in Roman Catholic and Lutheran. He's called Saint Augustine. In the Orthodox world, he's called Blessed Augustine. We don't necessarily hold every view that Blessed Augustine held to be on the same level as some other doctors of the church. So original sin is one of those things, because I touched on this earlier. We don't ascribe to the notion that God creates anything that isn't good. Anything that God does or creates is good. And we acknowledge that there are spiritual forces who can corrupt that goodness, but that is, we certainly don't attribute that to God's creation, if that makes sense. So all right, say the question one more time. How does sin
Basically,
fit into
give us the layman's version of theosis.
of theosis? Okay, so theosis, or the easiest way I can put it is that it is our way to become like God. It is our opportunity to respond to God's incarnation into this world. He took on flesh. He became man so that man could become God. Essentially, it is a journey. It's not a moment. Or if you want to look at it as a collection of significant moments, that's certainly understandable and fine. But ultimately, it is a journey. It's a process that didn't begin with our life. Our theosis did not begin with our birth or with our conception. It began with Adam. Our theosis began in Adam and continued throughout the entire Old Testament with the prophets, into the New Testament with the apostles, throughout church history, with our spiritual ancestors, and continues with us. Theosis isn't it's not only personal. It has a personal aspect to it, but it is corporate. It is collective. It recognizes that humanity and all of creation's journey to be reconciled back to God is intimately connected with everything that happened before us. We can't separate it. We don't become a singular Christian once we profess our faith or start living a life reflective of Christ. Everything started at the beginning. And our theosis won't be complete when we die. It will be complete in the eschaton, at the end of time.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. It's not a thing most of us in our circles often hear, but there's a sense in which God desires to marry his people, his creation, and there's a way in which through Jesus he has kind of bonded humanity, matter itself, to him in a way that is destroying sin, destroying the things that have kept us from that unity. And I think that's you see that in Scripture in Peter, where he talks about sharing the likeness and the divine Godhead and the divine nature of God. That God's ultimate goal for us isn't simply to deposit us in a heavenly realm, but to unite us to himself and to that relationship. And there's a lot we could talk about, I think, when you talk about the Trinity and being brought into that, the divine kind of economy of the triune God and the love and sharing in that relationship that is God's unadulterated love. But I want to give some people a chance to ask some questions. Those are some questions that were being asked. So if you'd like, if you raise your hand, we'll unmute you. You can go ahead and ask questions. Please ask questions, not statements. And also, please remember to be respectful in those questions. So anybody, or if you want to type them and I'll ask them, that's also fine if you'd rather not. Let's see, anybody? Let me see what else hasn't been asked here yet.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. My when we were sorry. So my question is a bit practical, maybe a bit too practical even, but often I've heard around what I've encountered here in China, especially when it comes to beggars, when it comes to the needy, right? There is this notion, there's always a notion that, oh, there's a greater scheme going on. They're taking the money, using it elsewhere, they're using it to buy alcohol, right? And ultimately at the end of the day, so there is the question of these like bigger things going on, and there's also a question of your personal stake when, well, you're only one person, there's only so much you can do. And so often even just having those thoughts just overwhelm you to the point when you're unable to even help the one person in front of you, just thinking about the whole problem.
Right.
So my question is, how do you reconcile those kind of things, and what's, based on your personal experience, what helps you kind of drive the difference and put yourself back in your shoes?
Okay, so that is a question. First of all, thank you for that question. It is something that I continue to wrestle with. I remember one time I was driving in my car in Virginia Beach, and I just came from the bank, and then I went to the grocery store and I was heading home. So I had some cash in my wallet. I had some groceries in my car, and there's this one spot where home insecure and homeless people will congregate outside of the grocery store as I'm about to turn onto the road to go home. And I I heard, or I felt, I sensed, it was nothing audible, but it's something that I definitely sensed inside of me. I felt like God was encouraging me to empty my wallet. And I had a couple $100s in there. And I'm like, I can't do that. That's way too much. What's that person going to do? That person's going to go buy alcohol or drugs or whatever the case may be. And I passed this person by. I didn't empty my wallet. I kept it. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of guilt because I missed the mark. I missed an opportunity to serve somebody because I was concerned with what they might do with what I gave them. Now, I did so out of ignorance because when I started to work more intimately with the communities that I serve, uh, I am a data nerd by nature, and I started researching the heck out of demographies and things that influence poverty in various communities. And I looked into things like drug addiction or substance use, substance abuse. And I recognized that there wasn't a statistically significant bump in substance use in homeless populations in contrast to people who lived in homes. The underlying factor was always poverty. People were homeless because they were impoverished. They didn't have enough money, period. And drug use, substance use wasn't a predictive indicator of homelessness. So that's an example of one myth that I had to confront and overcome in order to reach the conclusion that the person in front of me has a need. And it's the need that makes that person worthy of service and worthy of compassion and worthy of love. And the people who have like the least materially are often those who Christ loves and has to love just a little bit more, because they frankly need a little bit more love. And I knew that the next time I saw this person, if I would try to rectify that. Now, there are other occasions where I'm not home. Say I'm in Allen's neck of the woods, New York, New Jersey area, and there are a ton of people who are suffering from homelessness. I think in the United States, it is like top 5 for sure of greatest homeless population per capita. So I pass people who are homeless almost exclusively whenever I'm outside, every hour. And I'm tempted to empty my wallet and say, okay, whatever I have in here, I'm going to give to this person. But 50 feet down the road, I'm going to see another person. And I ultimately, I'm going to run out of money. And I know I can't do that because I'm also responsible for my family at home. I've got 4 kids. You met my youngest, Demetria. And I wrestle with this idea because there doesn't exist a tidy response for me as one person to give. And you touched upon that. But what I can offer from my experience is that it's never a bad thing to try to advocate on behalf of that person in your community. And if there are ways that you can connect with that person, that's the important part, is not just seeing that person for his or her need, but seeing that person for who they are. I have on many other occasions gone up to somebody who has a need and said, look, I don't have any money right now. How are you doing? And starting a relationship. I have a friendship with a guy who is in that same spot in Virginia Beach. His name's Thomas. I talk with him several times during the week. Sometimes I have something to give him, whether it's money, whether it's food. Sometimes I don't. And when I don't have something material to give him, I give him what is available to me, and that is my friendship. And what I do is try to connect with him because he is Christ and I am Christ. And a person who has material need also has emotional and mental and psychological needs, because let's be honest, we all crave community. It's part of our human condition. That's why we're here right now. And somebody who is alone on the street, or maybe lives with 1 or 2 other people in a group home, still craves that community. And if I can help provide that to him or her, there are occasions where that is exactly what they need in that situation, even if I can't give $15, $20.
So, John, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think we need to hear that it's not simply just giving our funds to people, but
right.
that people have a bigger, also deeper needs, as much as affirmation, fraternity, community, just to feel loved and to know they're loved. And there's an importance, I think, I fail at this all the time. And so I'm not saying this in any way as judgment, but hearing others, I forget who I heard this, but there's a difference between feeding the poor and eating with the poor. And there's a sense in which we probably need to begin to think more towards eating with rather than just feeding. And I think that kind of, it's maybe not possible every time. I don't think we need to put strings on all of our generosity. And I think that's also a temptation to try to control how we offer help, rather than just trusting that God has asked us to give without discrimination. But there's a sense in which we really, by limiting giving to simply just money or what we can do in a soup kitchen or something like that, miss out on the fact that God's calling us to really unique relationships. And that restores a lot more than just a empty stomach, which is obviously, we need to eat, but there's also a sense in which relationship returns dignity, returns respect,
right.
Restores a sense of brotherhood or a collective fraternity of humanity, to put it in. I don't know. Can't get the right word out, but you know what I mean, I think.
It fills the empty soul.
Yeah. Yeah.